Hi, Vikram. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thanks so much, Grace. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
To start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you went to IIT, obviously, and then you have worked at amazing companies like Google, and now you're founder of Galileo. Why don't we start with like what are some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shape you into who you are today?
For sure. Yeah. So many lessons. It's hard to distill them down, but I think one of the main ones was always to try and be join forces with really smart people and also always work on something which feels like it's just at the cusp of something which could be really big from a technology perspective. I've
Mhm,
always been in love with technology, and so always been interested in kind of being at that cusp. So when I started at Google, for instance, way back, it was on the Android team at Google, and
mhm,
back then this was in 2000 uh, 2011, right? So
mhm,
people don't realize it, but back then, notifications were an invention that came out of the Android operating
mhm,
system. As an example, super small team, 100 people, uh, and they had about 100 million users. So just being at the cusp of something really big, just before it's even happened, and with a very small group of smart people is something that I'm always looking for. And frankly, I feel like
mhm,
that's why startups are so awesome, because you can bring in super smart people and
mhm.
you can build super cool stuff for them, and it's just so exciting to do that.
For sure. I wonder, so when I guess like maybe we could walk us through at the beginning, like how do you kind of like discover the idea of like Galileo? And then obviously prior to like our show, like we have chatted about like, it kind of pivoted from like, serving one type of audience slash one type of clients to a little bit slightly different one. And maybe we could talk about like from the growth as like a founder from doing 0 to 1 to now you guys are Series B company, you guys raised like a lot of money. And why don't we talk about, I guess, like what was the journey like for you as a CEO to both doing the product as well as the sales to like pivot it onto like a level that you guys can like replicate the success?
Yeah, so let's see. If I take a step back about Galileo, so I'd been at Google for a while, and
Mhm,
one of the teams that I joined at Google just before I left was, broadly speaking, it was called Google AI, and
mhm,
specifically, I was working um, on the BERT model and working with the BERT model, and trying
mhm,
to see how we could build out NLP powered applications at scale,
mhm,
right? And now this
mhm,
is 2018, 2019,
mhm,
right? So
mhm,
we had noticed that the NLP models, especially BERT, distilled BERT, cold BERT, a bunch of these variations, they were spreading like wildfire in the AI community. So
mhm,
from where I was sitting, I was basically looking at how there is 80% of the world's data that's just unstructured, that's just sitting there, that's text and images and video, whereas only 15 to 20% of the world's data was structured data. And from the
mhm,
big company perspective, Google, when I looked outside at the startups, most companies were in this space, which was coming to be known as ML ops, which just seemed like such a tiny, small market that folks, and there were like 100 observability companies in ML ops. It was ridiculous. And so, versus the way we were seeing this at Google, was the big opportunity was with unstructured data, with unlocking AI for unstructured data.
mhm,
And my team was responsible for building out some of the first few large scale applications powered by NLP and these BERT models. And so, as a part of doing that, Grace, we saw firsthand what the different kinds of problems are.
mhm,
Where every single time you're working with unstructured data, at least back then, most of the money is actually going to the labeling companies, which
mhm,
are glorified just human workforces, barely
mhm,
any software, mostly just humans, right? And so we're
mhm,
spending millions of dollars every time for labeling the data and then test checking for the efficacy of the data and the quality of the data and the quality of the outcome. All of that was driven by humans. And the reason why we had to do that was because at the core of unstructured data, and these language models, um, they're just probabilistic, right? Because they're
mhm,
powered by neural networks. They have billions of weights. The weights are multiplied by vectors. They give you a certain output, and these tokens, it's all probabilistic. And so when your applications and software itself is probabilistic, you have
mhm,
no idea if you can trust it or not. So we started Galileo 4.5 years ago with this notion that, look, at some point AI is going to eat up all of software. at some point, software 2.0, which Andre Karpathy had coined at the time when I just started the company, which I thought was fantastic from his perspective, from his, he's such a genius. Like that was the absolute right term at the time, because
Mhm.
AI was going to start eating up all of software. Um, and so our thesis was, look, when unstructured AI becomes really, really big, this problem of non-determinism in software is going to become even bigger. And so we
Mhm.
started a thesis, which is now pretty non-obvious. And we have a couple of other companies that have started with the same predicament, but with the same hypothesis. But when we started your second part of the question around what the journey has been, we started out with focusing on data scientists that were trying to fine tune these language models, go into production, trying to
Mhm.
figure out how in production, how the applications are doing. So at the time, our product was very much focused on fine tuning with higher quality data to observe the model once it's actually out there. So we were called the deep learning company in the
Mhm.
market, right? And investors would look at us funny. Even when we raised our Series A, some of the investors took a big bet on us because they were like, "You guys seem like you're up to something. You guys are the only company that's building something in the language model space. Either this is going to not go anywhere, it's going to actually go somewhere. We don't know."
Mhm.
Um, so I like to joke about how we were the only cow in the pasture land for about 2 years. But then once the models themselves became larger, our
Mhm.
hypothesis was that, look, at this point, these models are like doctors that have gone out of medical school. They're now actually practicing. And at this point, we shouldn't be working on the fine tuning and the training side of things. That market's going to go away. Instead, these are going to become operating systems in of themselves. So let's actually start working towards what would the future of AI observability look like, right? And
Mhm.
what would happen when every application in the world is powered by these model operating systems? And so the hypothesis was still exactly the same: non-deterministic software. How do you observe it? And how do you build high quality metrics for that? And so at the surface level, I guess you could, if you could argue that we've pivoted from focusing on data scientists to developers, from focusing on fine tuning and training to inference and observability and runtime protection.
Mhm.
Core hypothesis and the focus on language models has always been the same.
I wonder when it comes to like AI observability tools. So like it's like one of them is like, I guess like from a normie perspective, there's like
Yeah.
I guess like watching the data or like also kind of like I guess like maybe we could start with how does it work, and then also like from a um monetary perspective. I think whenever I hear about the words like AI observability, I think about like open source, and then there's like also I feel like the monetization model, would it be like tracking the data quality, or like so like how do you examine the data quality to make sure that it is on par with what people are paying for? Maybe we could like, I mean, I don't think like I'm not sure. I'm kind of like self-conscious because I'm like non-technical. So I feel like the question I asked would be like, does this make sense? But how do you think about that basically?
Yeah, so if I had to break that down into two parts, one is just how does it work, and then how does it work from a monetization perspective.
Yes.
Um, so if you think about what's happening with um, AI observability today, and the reason why it's such an interesting space in its
Mhm.
earliest stages is because the AI applications themselves are just progressively becoming more mature, more complex. The
Mhm.
stack around AI is now coming together, and if you look back about maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago,
Mhm.
all prompt engineering was all the rage, because it was basically a prompt and a model. And
Mhm.
then vector stores came in and said that, look, we can add some context to your overall application, and that's going to ground your application in some data that you have as an organization, and that becomes your core tenet, right? And so you had now a vector store with context, you had a model, and you had a prompt. And now increasingly it's starting to move more and more towards agents and tools and
Mhm.
memory. And so the number of ingredients, as you can see, are starting to explode very quickly. And what's happening with developers is they're not data scientists. And
Mhm.
so developers expect it to be a linear paradigm where you build stuff and you ship stuff, and when something breaks, you fix it. So versus data scientists are used to more of a circular loop where you, as soon as you ship something, you're trained in your mind to know that it's going to fail as soon as you ship, because any new query that comes in, you have to learn from that and kind of take that back into your product and improve it continuously. So that's why I feel like AI observability, especially with unstructured data, is so dramatically different than traditional software engineering, right? And so to answer your first part of your question around like what it is, it's basically the observability of this new complex compound system where you have to monitor the prompt, you have to monitor the context, the quality of the context, you have to monitor, if the model is getting is the weights of the model changed, like OpenAI changed something, the weights of the model, and then now everything has kind of gone to nuts when it comes to the output of the application. So how do you monitor if the quality of your output is good or bad? And if it is bad, then how do you actually know why it's bad? So there's a whole different paradigm. So my hypothesis is, the observability companies of today, like a Datadog or a New Relic, they have to fundamentally have to shift the way they operate. And I don't know if they've completely grokked how large this market is and how quickly it's changing. But the nature of AI, like all of software is basically going to become AI powered. And so, the future is a very different kind of observability. So that's kind of how it works and what
Mhm.
what it is.
Mhm.
Monetization wise, the way we see it, it's all about it's less about giving you squiggly lines in a dashboard, right? It's less about hey Grace, like here's what has already happened, and by the way, your application just said something that was racist or just said something that was absolutely wrong. And
Mhm.
by the way, like you woke up in the morning and now you know, but the tweet has already gone out and your product has already made a fool of itself. That's not the way I think observability is going to work. Instead, when we go into a business and we talk to an enterprise, we basically hear constantly that they're very worried from a perspective of how do they actually trust this application, and it's almost like trusting a very smart human being that's been
Mhm.
tasked doing something, right? Like,
Mhm.
is it actually saying the right thing? Is it saying it in the right way? Um, if it's trying to say this thing, like, can you mitigate the risk of it doing
Mhm.
something wrong? And so when you think of it from that perspective, the cost of something going wrong in a business, especially if you're publicly traded or a large enterprise in Fortune 2000, a global 2000 company,
Mhm.
is massive. And so you'll do whatever it takes to reduce that risk. And so we are in the business of reducing risk when it comes to leveraging agentic systems, multi-agentic systems at scale.
I wonder, I guess like when you're thinking about like the hallucination, and I was listening to the podcast that you did like 2 years ago, I guess, when I guess like how did it kind of shift? And then because of like I feel like nowadays like the AI model is getting a lot more um context driven than the past. How do you guys think about like why is the I guess like why is AI hallucinating? And then like how do you guys kind of like stop it from hallucinating?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason for why it's so hallucinations in general, it's
Mhm.
been, the term itself has been around for a very long time, and
Mhm.
it's it didn't used to have a very negative connotation in academia, right? It was a feature, it wasn't a bug, because the way these models they work, it's kind of like it's modeled after the way the brain works. And
Mhm.
so essentially, you have a bunch of context that you're given this model. The model tries to make
Mhm.
sense of the words in the context that you're giving it, a bunch of
Mhm.
data. And then you have these models themselves have billions of weights, right?
Mhm.
And these weights are then multiplied by the vectors, and they basically spit out a bunch of tokens or different kinds of other words, and they assign a probability for all of the words, and then they're like, here, this is my answer. So if you
Mhm.
ask me a question around like what is your name, and I would say my name is Vikram Chatterji, there's a very high confidence in my brain around each of those words. Versus if you ask me a different question around like, all right, Vikram, how do you fly a plane? I'll give you an answer, but my confidence level is going to be really low on the tokens that are coming out of my mouth, right? And so, but so I assign a probability. The brain assigns a probability for all the words, and so because of that, right, when it comes to generative software, it's inherently probabilistic. And so that, I guess, like those, the fact that it's probabilistic and not deterministic, that gap is what I think people are calling hallucinations. And I don't think you can ever squash it. It's kind of almost like saying like, hey, every human being should only spew out facts which that they're 100% sure about. That's the difference between classic if else statement software engineering versus what we're dealing with right now, which is a whole different beast altogether. So you can never get hallucinations down to zero. Even in the world of AGI, it's still moving towards, a very smart human being. When you ask it a question outside of the context that it already knows about, it's gonna say something potentially wrong. So you can never get it down to zero. Now the question is great, but then that's bad. Now how do I launch this thing in production?
Mhm.
Um, and so that's where our thesis on this has been, you have to do two things. You have to be proactive and you have to be reactive. And the reactive thing is you have to you have to understand the failure modes in your application
Mhm.
really quickly, right? Like if your application is very specific, it's supposed to be like acting like a smart accountant for your taxes, let's say. I'll bet there are 100 YC startups that are doing exactly that, right?
Mhm.
Now, it can't screw up your taxes. So,
Mhm.
on the one hand, if you are an accounting expert, you'll probably know that here are the 20 or 30 different ways it can screw up. And so, you want to be able to create high quality metrics for that. We are in the business, we're the only company in the world that's actually built out a three-step process to get you
Mhm.
to 95 to 99% accuracy with these metrics, right? Nobody
Mhm.
else can do this. The second part is how do you then use these for real-time monitoring at scale for 100% of your traffic? But then you can still, when something goes wrong, you're still reactive when it comes to
Mhm.
figuring that out. So the other thing that we've done, and we pioneered this 2 years ago, is called runtime protection, powered by small language model evaluation models, which we call Luna, where if you know that something can go wrong with your accounting app, you can, in runtime with millisecond latencies, actually block that agent from delivering that wrong piece of information or inaccurate or harmful information back to the user. So
Mhm.
that's the change now. So you have this proactive and reactive mechanisms of doing this. And if you think about what this means for a company which is a Fortune 500 business, like a large bank out there,
Mhm.
it is the absolute difference between them losing millions of dollars of shareholder value
Mhm.
versus ensuring that they have the trust of their customers and actually increasing their bottom line by
Mhm.
providing a tremendous amount of value through
Mhm.
their AI products.
Mm. I have so many questions there. I wrote down three. One is like, how do you think about the subsector? So, for example, let's say you mentioned about like the YC startup that's doing taxes, using I guess like a Gen AI model to do taxes, and then there's like a lot of hallucination and like there's that subsector, right? If I'm
Yeah.
a dentist, if I'm a lawyer, like I feel like in each subsector, the data probably hallucinate in a different way. And then, as you mentioned, like you guys would hire these like, not hire, but like I guess you guys would leverage the experts to let the expert predict like how the AI will kind of hallucinate or like how this like things could kind of like go wrong, and then to be proactively um finding that solution for that subsector data, or like subsector hallucination, just basically capture that, right? So how do you do that for like different subsectors, since like
Yeah.
there's like so many of them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So essentially, regardless of the subsectors, I think the fundamental nature of how these models work and these applications work, they're still
Mhm.
very much the same. So it's kind of like if you think about how traditional observability works today, with like at the end of the day, it's always a software application. And so if you look at it from the perspective of a Datadog or companies like that, they don't really care about whether the application is for a lawyer or if it's for an accountant. They just look at it as, was this built using Java or Python or something else, or
Mhm.
Ruby on Rails. And so then they'll have different kinds of integration points, but it's essentially works exactly the same way. It's all about logging all the inputs and the outputs and then surfacing the different kinds of issues back to you. The one
Mhm.
big difference though, Grace, is that in the world of AI, right,
Mhm.
like what's happening in the world right now is the ability that you need in order to actually build out software applications is just dramatically reducing. And so because of that, the kind of developers today are much more citizen developers versus super high paid software engineers. And as a result of that, right, from an observability perspective, it becomes really important for them to be able to create their own metrics and to be able to create their own evaluators and these custom evaluators. And that's one reason why uh, when it comes to building these AI apps for lawyers or accountants, we've basically
Mhm.
given the power back to the developer or back to the citizen developer to say that,
Mhm.
if you're building an app, for instance, for automatic investing in startups, right?
Mhm.
You can basically create your own metrics very easily, which are very
Mhm.
specific to the venture ecosystem, which nobody else would know about but you, and that becomes
Mhm.
your IP. So I think that's the only place where I feel like it's a little bit different depending on which use case and which industry you're in,
Mhm.
versus traditional observability. But the fundamental nature of how AI works and these applications work is still very similar across all these different organizations.
Mm. I wonder, I guess like a adjacent question would be like, how do you think about selling it to Fortune 500 versus startups? I feel like maybe we could start with like, what does a current sales process kind of look like for you guys? Obviously you guys are selling to developers. At what stage of like developer would look into the product? And I guess like how do you um basically create the sales motion? Like if I'm like a director of engineering, I decided to just go for Galileo versus like other companies, or like do you have to do um bottoms up like sales, which is like start with the engineers, like give them like a free trial on some stuff? Yeah, how do you think about like the sales motion to this product?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, frankly, because
Mhm.
we do have a free SaaS version of Galileo. So if any developer today that's listening to this goes to Galileo.ai, there's a button there for adopting the
Mhm.
product for free. So if you have an AI application within 5 minutes, you can just log your first trace. You can get our insights engine. You can get our multi-agentic
Mhm.
agent graph, all of that for free, right? So we definitely have that, and we have tens of thousands of developers that are
Mhm.
signing up for free every single month on our platform.
Mhm.
We barely marketed that. We launched that a couple of months ago, the
Mhm.
free SaaS version of Galileo. So there's that, and and we really love that because we
Mhm.
get there's so much um, there's such rich feedback that you can get from startups because
Mhm.
their life depends on it when
Mhm.
it comes to building all these applications, making sure that it's successful. So you get really really good feedback from them around good and bad, and
Mhm.
it's very rapid, and you can start to get a sense for what parts of the ecosystem are actually getting traction versus not. And then
Mhm.
when it comes to enterprises, I feel like it's a very different ball game altogether, right? We've we've definitely noticed that in when it comes to AI, as compared to any of the past large technology revolutions that have happened, like whether it's mobile or cloud, enterprises have taken up AI much faster because it's basically almost like one layer on top of the cloud. So because most
Mhm.
enterprises already adopted the cloud, it was just much easier for them to then just adopt these GPUs and TPUs and then
Mhm.
start adopting these models and just start building on top of it. So the adoption has been really, really quick amongst the enterprise. And so we organically just started to work more closely with some of the Fortune 500 businesses. And then now we have dozens of Fortune 500 businesses that we are working live with. But the problem statement there, Grace, becomes really different because now
Mhm.
you're working at a very different level of scale, where we have customers where we are live in production with them, and they have hundreds of queries per second.
Mhm.
For every single query, Galileo has to have runtime guardrailing with dozens of guardrails, with millisecond latencies. So we have to build our own inference engine. We have to build our own cost optimization system. So there's that whole piece of infrastructure that we have to build for making
Mhm.
sure that all of that can happen at scale. Versus a startup is different. As when you're selling to startups, it's more like they're focused much more on evals. They're focused much more
Mhm.
on just basic observability, not so much of a high scale problem just yet.
Mm. I wonder when you were thinking about, I guess like the client construction. I mean, I just made this up. So
Yeah.
I feel like there is obviously the energy and time that you have to spend on like Fortune 500 to build the infrastructure and to build making sure like everything is like the foundation's like right versus like startups is more just focused on simple like observability and stuff. How
Yeah.
do you think about like the client construction slash thinking about like walking backwards from let's say one day become like $1 billion company that hitting like $100 million ARR, or maybe even now it's like more than that to like be a public company sometimes. So I guess how do you think about scaling it versus like building it since like you have went through a bunch of era to become at
Yeah.
your current stage?
Yeah. So I think it's always it's hard to predict the future. So we the way I think of this is
Mhm,
it's always in small increments. So it's so right now we have a pretty well-oiled machine when it comes to working with large enterprises. Like if we're super enterprise ready, and
mhm,
that requires a lot of different things, right? It requires a lot of investments all the way from the infrastructure to having really good SLOs to
mhm,
having even DevOps and a bunch of things. So and having security and privacy and
mhm,
role-based access control. There's so many things to be enterprise ready, and we have all of that.
mhm,
Um, Now the question becomes, how do you scale that, right? How do you
mhm,
scale the inbound demand that's coming in? How do you
mhm,
manage the demand that's coming in? And how do you actually try and convert that into actual value? Um,
mhm,
and so we have a team that's been built in place now, which we've come together. Like there's demand gen, there's growth engineering,
mhm,
there are our reps, our AEs and sales team is absolutely kick-ass, and they've come together mostly in the last 1 year or so. Before that, it was mostly me and my founders doing a lot of the sales in the business for the first many millions of revenue. Now it's much more of a system that we've built out, and then it's all about tweaking different knobs in the system as the market grows. And the interesting thing in our market, the way I see this is we're still in that 1% of the market. And in the next 2 years or so, we're going to get to around 30-40% of enterprises adopting generative AI. Right now, I think it's still in that 1% of early adopters in the financial services and telco space that are adopting it. But it's
mhm,
dramatically going to be increasing over the next 2 years. And so the way
mhm,
we see this is let's just be ready from every single perspective for the market as it grows.
mhm.
But that's been the biggest shift, to answer your question, from founder-led sales to have building a system and a machinery which can just work, where you put $1 in and you can get $5 out.
Mhm.
That's the place that we always aim to be at.
For sure. I wanna touch upon so this is like on your website, right? So like you guys have the mastering LM as a judge. Maybe we could talk about like I guess like what are some interesting findings or like what are some interesting takeaways that you guys have found and then like what inspired the ebook? How will that like kind of help with um I guess like solving the hallucination problem?
Yeah, so I think so. This was important for us to do because what we realized was in the market, the most naive way by which people were trying to um, build evaluators
Mhm,
was by just asking, I don't know, GPT or OpenAI models to just basically be act as a judge, right? And so that's
mhm,
just the idea behind a basic LLM as a judge. What we try to do with enterprises is we try to tell them that, look, if you do that, that's a very naive approach. And and since the very beginning of Galileo, we've been focused on the measurement problem of AI, and that's a very big part of our research. And we built a lot of deep IP and published papers in that. So the reason why we publish this is because when you're working with LLMs as a judge, instead of thinking of it as something very simple as like let me just call OpenAI and hope for the best,
mhm,
it's actually much more nuanced than that. And we've built a lot of infrastructure in order for this to be um, this to follow a process. So, as an example, in this, one thing which you talked about was if you use if you use our mechanism, which is called chain poll, which is basically a chain of thought based reasoning and then a polling mechanism in the end. Um, the accuracy of your LLM as a judge, even if you use you don't have to use a large model anymore. You can use a slightly smaller model, which
mhm,
makes it dramatically cheaper. And even with that mechanism, the accuracy can go up from somewhere around roughly 60% to around 75 to 80%, right? And we published a paper on this about, I want to say almost 2 years ago, called Chain Poll, and it's in archive and it's been cited a bunch of times. And now I think it's much more common and for other startups and and folks to also use the same mechanism. But we pioneered that about 2 years ago. And then what we started realizing was, look, I mean, this is all great, but it's still LLM is a judge, right? It's very expensive and it's still very slow.
Mhm.
And it just boggles my mind how everyone is just fine with that. Because when it comes to observability, if you go to most companies and you ask them, like just the other day, I can't name the company, but I was talking to this business where they've not gone public yet, but it's a super late stage company. It's one of those companies where you just wonder why didn't they get gone public yet? They have,
Mhm.
over $1 billion in revenue. But I
Mhm.
was talking to their head of AI and asking her about, look, why aren't you, when it comes to monitoring, are you monitoring all of your traffic? And she's like, no, hell no, I'm just monitoring 5% of my traffic because I'm just sampling it because that's what tools allow me to do these days. And like that doesn't make any sense. What about the 95% of your traffic? And she said, yeah, but LLM as a judge, it's so expensive because if I ask a GPT to basically monitor 100% of my traffic, it's going to be millions of dollars
Mhm.
to do that. And so that's the reason why we also try to educate people in the enterprise about
Mhm.
like, that's you don't have to do that. If you use
Mhm.
Galileo, you can actually use our Luna evaluation models, which are super easy to adopt, super easy to auto fine tune, and they're powered by small language models. So step one, build an LLM as a judge, make sure it's high accuracy. We've built automatic feedback loops in there. And then you can further take that and make it small language model. So there's a step one,
Mhm.
step two, and step three there, which people don't think about versus what we've been up to for the last many years. So which is why we published this ebook. We like to give back to the community almost in terms of all of our learnings,
Mhm.
um, at the risk of other competitors kind of taking that and doing it. But we're up to 100 other things, so we're not worried about that. But we do think like when developers read this kind of stuff, they should kind of realize that there's a better way to do this versus just using an LLM as judge and just using another off-the-shelf observability platform.
For sure. How do you think about like I guess like competing with incumbents or like people who are offering space who is like a legacy company?
Yeah. Well, I was at a legacy company. I was at Google for the longest time. And let me tell
Mhm.
you that, you can throw 10 people at a problem, but unless it's your obsession, it'll never
Mhm.
be a great platform. It'll never be a great product.
Mhm.
And so the way I see this is the incentives are just very different for larger companies, right? Like
Mhm.
I would suggest, I think of it as they're stuck. Like which is also true for a Series C, Series D company. Like when the land beneath your feet changes
Mhm.
completely, but you're stuck with 100 customers that are buying your product, which is very different. You can't just say goodbye to all your 100 customers. You have to keep feeding them.
Mhm.
So the act of pivoting or moving into a very different direction becomes really hard, which is I think what has been happening with the large cloud providers and others as well, right? And even
Mhm.
the existing incumbent players in the observability space.
Mhm.
They'll all tell you that they're working on exactly this, but when you look at their platform, it's very half baked. It'll
Mhm.
be surface level, it'll look nice, it'll have interesting visualizations and whatnot, but that's not AI observability at all. And enterprise developers, they know that and they can discern that very easily.
Mhm.
So bake-offs with them have been very, very easy because of that.
I wonder, so like I feel like on your website there's like so many top AI company like Crew, Writer, like and then I saw like the big company like HP, MongoDB. Why don't we talk about like how do you land your first customer? And then since then, how do you think about I guess like um the entire made up of the clients? Like, would you say, like, let's call it like 50% focusing on like larger companies or like 50% focusing on um the more like early stage companies? Actually, some of our people on our Smart AI 100 list are your clients as well, the
Yeah,
EMA people. I don't know if it's called EMA or EMA, but
yeah,
yeah. So you have like the stellar clients, by the way. Yeah.
yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, so the way we see this is we love to build for the enterprise as well as and learn from the startups. And so we when we started out, we were trying to be very conscious of who we choose as our customers, especially the
Mhm,
lighthouse customers,
mhm,
um, because you have to make sure that you're working with a team which is extremely smart, which is which is serious about actually productionizing this.
mhm,
And
mhm,
we really liked the idea of working with with some of these enterprises because we realized that they were going to launch these things at scale,
mhm,
and it's at a scale that most startups don't see, right? And so that's why we chose the first few customers very, very carefully. And they came through different kinds of ways. Some of them were just inbounds because of,
mhm,
we did like the PDF that you just shared, right? Like the LLM as a judge. We do that. We've been doing that for the last 4 years now, where we keep publishing papers and publishing webinars about all the research and the work that we've been doing in the space, because we are the only company in the world that's been working on exactly this for the last 4.5 years. And a lot of these enterprises appreciate that. They'll read that. They'll come to us. We published an agent leaderboard, a model leaderboard, an LLM leaderboard, which is powered by our own metrics. And so reading that, a lot of these enterprises, startups, they came to us and they said that this is great. Can we work together? So that's kind of how we got our first few initial customers, and we try to be very careful about not going overboard with too many, and we built with them for them. This is way back, and
mhm,
then started to replicate it once we started to see like 10, 15, 20 others coming to us with exactly the same problem statement.
mhm,
um, and from a division perspective, like most of the sales team is very much focused on larger enterprise customers and what I would call like mid-market businesses. Um, but that being said, like that's why we launched our free SaaS product, because when you started talking to startups, right, without a sign up for free and just using the product, it's no startup wants to work and talk to a sales team. And so we just wanted them to just adopt the platform out of the box in a very self-serve way. It seems really obvious right now, but we kind of took the reverse approach, where we started with giving the access to the platform one by one so we could learn from them, and then eventually launched our free SaaS product, which now, like I said, has 10,000 people, new signups, literally tens of thousands of signups every single month. So anybody listening here from an early stage company, whether you're two people in a garage or whether you're
mhm.
on your list, especially, right?
Mhm.
Um,
The
they could,
list is, like, very crazy. The
yeah,
list is, yeah, sorry, keep going. Yeah.
no, exactly. The list, I saw that list and it was really great, because it's exactly those kinds of companies where they're probably thinking about like, how do I
Mhm,
monitor my agents and multi-agentic systems at scale? And they can
mhm.
literally now go to Galileo.ai and they can sign up for free, and they can just start logging those applications. And we are extremely generous with the number of traces and the number of it's unlimited users. It's millions of traces, so they can just go there and start using that.
Love that. Since, like, as you mentioned, like, you were chatting with, like, a later stage head of engineer, like a head of AI, so they were not using ChatGPT because of it's going to cost millions of dollars. How do you shrink your own cost at Galileo to make sure that it's not, if you're tracking the 95% of the uh, traffic or slash 100%, like, how do you kind of like make sure that your cost is not going too high?
Yeah, so essentially, it's similar, where we focus a lot on how do you we that's it's actually a very large science, because when it comes to reducing cost, it's you can do that at the model level, you can do that at the compute level, the GPU utilization level, and so we actually have a lot of work that we've done to reduce GPU utilization by like 70-80%.
Mhm,
Um, so we have platform engineers that come from OpenAI, from our past teams at Google, that have worked on this. We also have teams that are working on the model itself, and how do you start working with smaller language models while not also uh, giving up on the generalizability and the accuracy of some of these much larger models. And so that's a model shrinking problem, right? And so there's a lot of work that we've done on
mhm.
all of those sides, and we publish papers on all of that. And so the combination of all of this is what lets you not just go with a naive solution where it's like, let's just use OpenAI and foot the bill for that. I think that's extremely naive, and frankly, most of our competitors do that, versus how do you actually build entire infrastructure all the way from the model layer to the GPU utilization layer to the actual inference engine layer, such that you can actually reduce costs, reduce latencies, and so that's how we keep our costs low as well, and our margins are high.
I wonder, so when you guys were developing the solution, so maybe walk us through, like, since like you started the company 4 years ago, how do you think about like the company's like different stages, like what kind of benchmark that you need to hit, since you guys grow from like C to Series B within very short amount of time, and then obviously I think like it you guys also tapping into the chat GPT era. Now we're in the lovable era.
Yeah,
So like how do you think about the shift
yeah,
from as a CEO's perspective on at the beginning it was you and your co-founders like,
yeah.
being in a garage and
Yeah.
to now you guys have like a really big team.
Um, I think of it as when we were just three people in a garage, which literally was the case. I have a picture of us in my co-founder Atin's garage,
Mhm,
where Galileo was just a whiteboard and a computer.
mhm,
But back then, the I think the problem that you're chasing just is different. Like at that
mhm,
time, we were just trying to validate whether the problems that we had experienced at scale at Google, and my co-founder was
mhm,
leading Uber Michelangelo. He actually built the world's first feature store, um, and so we were trying to see if just validation of the problems. The
mhm,
first many months of Galileo was just like, does
mhm,
are there others out there who are building with language models? Are they facing the same issues of I don't even know if this is actually working or not that
mhm,
we needed? And turns out that they did. And then the next part was what's the minimal product that we can build out so we can just go to market as quickly as possible. And so we did that. And so when it comes to seed rounds, right, we basically had raised a little bit of money and validated the problem more than anything else. And once we did that, then we that gave us the ability and the permission to start going after some initial customers. And because we were the only players in the space in the language model space, we
right.
basically went after, think of like, most companies that were using language models, like your Gong and Square and whoever else, and we basically went to them and said, like, look, we have this thing and nobody else has this thing, and they were like, this is an interesting thing, we've never
Mhm.
seen this thing before.
Wait, I have a question. So like why are you guys the only person in the space back then? And then nowadays like I have an opposite question. So like I
Yeah,
just invest in like a agent testing company, and I feel like because like lately like MIT published the research of like 95% of agent that actually never make it to
yeah,
be used. And but in that space there's so many companies like agent test in the agent testing space, and it's like really hard to even pick the winners. Like, obviously I feel like I picked the team that kind of similar to your background, as like you guys went through the big company and then you see there's an actual problem there, and then you guys were building solution at the company similar to what you guys are doing now. But
yeah.
I guess like how do you think about like why is when you guys started, like why there's no competitors, and um how do you navigate if what's your thought on like the people who are building in like a really competitive space as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we started out 4.5 years ago, that was 21 months before ChatGPT actually launched, right?
Mhm,
So back then, the prudent thing to do, Grace, as when you're starting out as a company, is just
mhm,
risk management, right? So
mhm,
most people who are starting in the AI space, they were starting with a focus on structured data.
mhm,
Because most organizations, like the 500,000 data scientists in the world, they were all working with structured data. That was what was ML ops. Versus our thesis was, let's just go after the rest of the folks, the unstructured data folks. Um, the market size for that was extremely tiny. It's probably
mhm,
just the PhDs from Stanford that were working on language models, right? That was it. So
mhm,
frankly, we took a huge market risk and some product risk when we started the company. And most founders try to take, I wouldn't say the easier route, but the more
mhm,
near-term obvious thing. Like right now, most people are like, let me start an accounting company for AI. Let me start and the AI dentist or the AI this and the AI that, because it's the most like the fastest way to make a buck, right? And we
mhm,
took a different approach where we like, let's take the long term approach of
mhm,
working on these language models, and the hypothesis is that these models are going to get bigger and bigger and better at some point. So that's why, like, I think there was just nobody else in the market at the time who was trying to do this, because nobody else was stupid enough to take a bet on language model observability in 2021. Uh,
mhm.
versus I would say last 2 years, yeah, there's been a lot of noise in this market, and but these big banks that we work with and these others, they do tell us that, look, we've been talking to you for 3 years, but the last 1 year, there's like company A, B, C, and D that are coming to us with different flavors of this exact same thing. It's ridiculous. It's become noisier, it's become more competitive.
Mhm.
My take on all of this is the end user, the end customer is very smart, because they have a task to be done. At the end of the day, my take is always like, you have to focus on the user and the customer. They are your oracle. Forget about the competition for a second. Just focus on them. What's their core problem, and how can you innovate to really solve for that problem in a very meaningful way? That is
Mhm.
all that matters. And if you can do that while you can build a really interesting go-to-market motion, I don't care so much. I guess like we've been in this space long enough that we've seen a bunch of these competitors come in. Some of them just died away. Some of them,
Mhm.
they had, I don't know, co-founder feuds, and then they died away. Some of them had they ran out of money and they died away. Some of them got bought by the other player. Some of them got acquired. And so now it's, we don't spend, I personally tell the company and everybody in the company that it's a lot of fun to watch competitors, but think of it as you're driving in a car. You have a
Mhm.
road to drive on towards a customer,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
competition of the ads on the billboard. You don't stop the
Mhm.
car to watch the ad. It's like, that's fun, that's cool, interesting data point. But I'm not going to turn the car in any direction because of them.
Mhm.
I'm going to turn the car only because of my customer. So
That's so true. My mom said the same thing. Whenever I think about competition, like just because like I don't know, I don't like people always say, oh, they don't think of XYZ as a competition. I feel like it's it's also like exactly like what you said. Like basically you have to focus on the road than like, looking at like what's around you. Um, how do you think about fundraising in general? Like maybe if you could tell us about like at the beginning when you were the only person who was like kind of
yeah.
identify the problem, then at that stage of fundraising, was it easier? Was it hard? And then since you guys already raised like Series B, which is like, a lot of people's um who is listening, maybe they're trying to get to where you are, or so how do you think about what's your like advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, my general thesis with fundraising has been that I don't know, you have to do it for the right reasons almost, and you have to be a little bit principled about it. What I mean by that is, for us, when we were raising our Series A, we've always had this question around like, should we do this?
Mhm.
It's not so much about like, just because you raise a round and it'll be on LinkedIn, and a lot of people will be like, this is really great for you, but you actually might be shooting yourself in the foot by
Mhm.
overvaluing yourself. And so maybe I'm old fashioned about this, but I feel like you should be really deeply thinking about whether you're adding value to a customer, if you're being able to add value to the customer over and over again, and there's something there, right? So when you're raising a Series A, for instance, we very quickly started to get a bunch of interest from different customers. We
Mhm.
generated revenue pretty fast. And then our question was like, great, okay, so this is something that we want to do for at least the next 2 years and see where this goes. Because again, at that point, nobody else was doing what we did. And so we from a principal perspective, we basically thought of this as, let's go with an investor that has the same mindset as us.
Mhm.
Let's go with an investor that has a long-term thought process. And we just want to raise X amount of money. We don't want to raise $100 million for the sake of it, just so that we can put it on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
But we want to raise X amount of money so that we can last for another 2 years with 10 to 15 people. And that's all we need to do. And then we started talking to a couple of investors, and Battery Ventures came about, and they were absolutely incredible. They
Mhm.
had a thesis in the space. It was like a marriage, where we were speak and finishing each other's
Mhm.
sentences. And so then it becomes more of a conversation, Grace, versus what I did not want to do was go in and, I don't know, pitch somebody and
Mhm.
get them on the other side and show them what it. You can't do that. It has to be almost a like-minded person on the other side, and you have to be convinced that you want to go for the next 2 years. It's the same with the Series
Mhm.
B. We saw a massive amount of growth over the last year and a half. We grew our revenues by around 800%. We've again grown revenue by around 100% this year, and are set to double again. So when you're seeing that kind of growth, then the question becomes, okay, awesome. So do we think that this is going to continue this way and grow,
Mhm.
or something else? And so at the Series B stage, we basically thought that, wait a second, this is just the beginning, and so we need to make sure that we are going to be around for the next 2 years, and that makes it easier.
For sure. How do you think about like what is like a trend that you're currently observing in the observability space?
Um, in the observability space, we are. I think a trend that I'm noticing is it's what's interesting is there is even within generative AI, people enterprises are realizing that these agents are just a slightly different beast
Mhm,
than traditional AI, like RAG-based applications and
mhm,
prompt-based applications, right? And so this was a thesis that we had made about a year ago, um, where these agents are they're going to start talking to each other. There's going to be authentication issues. There's going to be all sorts of things, and so I feel like we've still not completely grokked the shape of how all of these agents are going to be working with each other and the different kinds of observability challenges that are going to happen. But in general, I'm noticing that that's the direction which the puck is going. I think of agents as the biggest use case when it comes to generative AI to actually make this a market, versus chatbots were never going to be the thing, right? So I think that's where this is going, which is why Galileo, we also have been thinking about ourselves for the last many, many, many months now as we are the agent observability business, that's built for that, and we've been building with multi-agentic applications in mind, which is why we recently launched our multi-agent graph, our multi-agent automatic insights, where we give developers automatic insights powered by a reasoning engine that we built out from the ground up, for failure mode analysis for multi-agentic systems. So we do think that that's where the puck is going. It's going to be very complex multi-agentic systems at scale in the enterprise, and anybody who's not thinking that way, I feel like is going to probably be left behind.
mm. What is the like I guess like multi-agent kind of like approach will look like in the next call it 2 years? I don't want to go for 5 or something.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. It's hard to say, but I think it's gonna be very different. And I think, again, like it's gonna start moving more and more towards what I think of as micro agents,
mm,
meaning like just like microservices architectures became really popular, and it was more about let's build many many microservices and then connect them all together with these APIs. It's gonna be very similar, where instead of having one big agent that does your taxes, right, it's gonna be maybe 20 little workers that are doing like X, Y, Z, and W, and now you're connecting them all together with this protocol. And so I think that's what's taking shape right now, where you have some very early protocols like Google's A2A, which is really interesting, and it's coming together. And then you have it's becoming easier and easier to author tiny agents. So I think that's the direction in which things are going to be going in, where you'll have many different agents working together to perform many different tasks. And so in the enterprise, my guess is that in the next 1 year, 2 years or so, people won't be talking about how I have like 20 agentic apps in production. They're going to be saying like things like, I have 1,000 micro agents already in production, but I'm having API failure issues between agents. So it's going to be a very different thing. I think it's at the end of the day, it's skewing more and more towards software engineering, whereas it all started with data science. Language models are a data science concept, but it's skewing
mhm,
much more towards software engineering architectures and the same principles as what we've always had before, but
mhm,
inherently different. Which is why I keep saying, like, the traditional software observability has to transform into AI observability in the next
mhm.
1 or 2 years, and we'll all have to adapt as the stack keeps changing and keeps coming into shape. I think we're all in this really fantastic time right now where we're all contributing towards what that stack looks like.
For sure. I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we wrap with a 30-second fire round for you.
Sure thing.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I have recency bias. So I there's this book called Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It's basically about the gaming industry.
Mhm,
It's really interesting about how people, these two kids out of MIT, they built a really interesting game and it went viral, and then they had to work with the idea of like, wait a second, this is an actual business that's coming to shape from two people in a garage building a game. It's really interesting.
nice. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Um, I would go back and like invite Andre Karpathy to my party because when we started out, he coined software 2.0. I think he's just a genius when it comes to looking at the future and making complex things really simple. I know it sounds really uh, boring Bay Area, but right now that's the I would love to talk to.
uh, who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh gosh, there are way too many people. I think especially when it comes to the startup ecosystem, gosh, like it's nuts how many people take a bet on you over here in the Bay Area, especially. It's insane. So there's lots of people. I think are some of the investors, frankly, I would say, it's especially the earliest investors when we were the only cow in the pasture land. They're the
Mm.
ones I feel like were truly impactful to take a bet on us before anybody else did.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Oh, I'll probably be on a running trail somewhere. I love to run.
Love that. Well, Vikram, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you so much for having me and great conversation.
Let me quickly end stream.